Today I'm going to share with you my opinion on the new Brightin Star 24mm 1.8 Sony E-mount lens, which Brightin Star kindly sent me for free in exchange of making this video. So first of all, the price for this lens is $310, at least for the launch period between December 12 and 25, 2025. And then after that, the price is going to go up to $330, which is pretty much the same price as the 7 Artisans 24mm 1.8 lens I've reviewed a while back. And I honestly think this is a fair price for a third-party Chinese lens. Now let's take a look at the physical features. First of all, the build quality is absolutely fantastic. Everything is made of metal pretty much and feels extremely solid and premium. It is somewhat bulky though, as you can see, for a 1.8 prime lens. Let's see the total weight. 436 grams, which is pretty heavy for a 1.8 prime lens. And then on the back, you have a metal lens mount, no weather gasket for weather sealing, a USB-C port for firmware upgrades, nice and smooth aperture ring with no option to click or declick the aperture ring, an AF/MF switch, a function button which you can customize with your Sony camera, a nice and smooth focus ring, and here on top a 62mm filter thread. Now in terms of autofocus performance, I've tested this lens with my Sony ZV-E1 and honestly I could not notice any significant issues. Sometimes, yes, it was kind of hunting, but it wasn't too terrible, and honestly I can't really remember the last time I've had a lens with bad autofocus performance from China. Yes, if you're going to shoot in challenging lighting situations like when you backlight your subject or shoot in low light, maybe it's going to hunt more, but that's pretty much the case also with native Sony lenses. Also, in terms of like focus splitting performance, I think it performs extremely well. So if you like doing focus stacking or pulling shots, you're going to be very happy with this lens. Then when it comes to noise, there is no noise at all from the motors when the lens is autofocusing, but the minimum focus distance is kind of disappointing. First of all, it is 32 centimeters, which is pretty far for this kind of a focal length. But at the same time, when shooting wide open at the minimum focus distance, you get pretty soft results, actually extremely soft results, which is kind of disappointing because personally I like shooting at the minimum focus distance with this kind of a focal length because it gives you like this weird perspective of having the background wide and blurry and then you're close to your subject basically. Next, I want to talk about stabilization, and the main reason I mentioned this is because for the first week of using this lens I had some stabilization issues with my Sony ZV-E1, and the reason for this is because some of these third-party lenses do not communicate well with the stabilization algorithm on your Sony camera basically, because the algorithm will find the focal length that you're using and then it will adjust the stabilization according to that focal length. But sometimes the lens does not communicate well with the camera, and to fix this, what you have to do is manually set the focal length to whatever you're using to get the best results, which was the case in here. After I've set the algorithm basically to 24mm, I got much better stabilization performance. So that's definitely something to consider if you're going to buy this lens. You will have to manually set the stabilization setting to 24mm to get the best results. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty horrible until Brightin Star is going to basically update the firmware, if you will. All right, now let's take a look at the image quality. It is f1.8, f2.8, f4, and f5.6. Let's zoom in. As you can see at f1.8, it is somewhat soft in the center, but it becomes significantly better at f2.8. And then at f4 and f5.6, it is much better actually. Let's go to the corner. I would say it performs the best at f5.6. As you can see, it is significantly sharper in here than at f4. Let's go to another corner in here. Not horrible, but definitely something worth considering. Also, if you can look in here, this lens does have somewhat of a distortion and vignetting also in the corners when shooting wide open. Here is a more real-world example. Let me zoom in. f1.8 now is in here. And honestly, it's not too bad. Looks almost identical to f2.8. Let's go to the side. Not a huge difference. I mean, it's a bit soft in here compared to like f5.6, but that's to be expected. Also, no chromatic aberration issues that I can really notice. But then here is how it performs at the minimum focus distance. As you can see, the difference between 1.8 and f4 is huge. If you look at this barcode in here, there's a huge difference even between 1.8 and f2.8. It is really soft when shooting wide open at the minimum focus distance. Here is a more real-world example, if you will, also shot at the minimum focus distance. I focused in here more or less. And honestly, the way transitions from the subject in here, from the focused area to the background, if you will, looks extremely cheap when shooting wide open. And here is a more real-world example. Also, you can look at the bokeh at the same time. I personally do not like how it transitions from the subject to the background when shooting wide open. Again, it looks a bit digital and kind of like it was shot on a smartphone, but you let me know down below what you think. Here is another real-world example. I focused on this rock in here, and here you can kind of see how the bokeh performs. This lens definitely has like a vintage character to it with the bokeh, and also with the overall softness and mushiness in the background. It looks very vintagey, if you will. It's not too bad, but it's something definitely worth considering. If you are after like a sharp lens with like perfect optics, this might be not for you, honestly. All right, and now here's how it performs in terms of like ghosting and flaring at f1.8. I think it performs actually really well in this regard. You do see some flaring issues a little bit and some ghosting in here, but it's very well controlled in my opinion. It's not too terrible. And here you can kind of see the flare. Not too distracting in my opinion. This is the same angle but at f5.6, and you can kind of see the sun stars start to appear, but the ghosting performance is more or less the same. Yes, it's slightly worse at f1.8, as you can see. Like you have this fogginess in here, but again, it's not really horrible for a budget Chinese lens, if you will. And then here is how the sun stars look at f8. I think this was shot. I think it looks pretty good, not too bad. And again, here is another example of this beautiful fella in here. Just wanted to show you how it transitions from the subject to the background. Definitely has like a vintage character to it. Alright, so to summarize, here is basically what you're getting for the price of about 300 bucks with this lens. Fantastic build quality, minimal design with nice amount of features like AF/MF switch, function button, nice and smooth aperture ring, focus ring, but at the same time, it is somewhat bulky and heavy for a 1.8 prime lens. Next, the autofocus performance is excellent. Focus breathing performance is excellent. Minimum focus distance performance is pretty bad. It's 32 centimeters, and then when shooting wide open, it produces really soft results, as I've shown throughout this video. And in terms of overall image quality, I would say it performs pretty good, not too bad. If you're after a vintage character, you will definitely enjoy this lens, but for me, I don't really like how it performs at the minimum focus distance. It's pretty soft when shooting wide open, and also I don't like how it transitions from the subject to the back in terms of like blurriness, if you will. It looks pretty cheap, almost look like it was shot on a smartphone. Let me know down below if you think otherwise. And also the stabilization issue is kind of annoying at the same time, but if you're like okay with all of these things, I would say you'll be pretty happy with this lens. It's not terribly pricey, it's pretty well priced in my personal opinion, but there are definitely some quirks to consider before buying this lens. Anyhow, I'm going to leave some links for it down below. Also, let me know down below if you have any questions and comments, and I guess I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.